every cell in your body has mitochondria, and the more metabolically active they are, the muscles and the brain, the kidneys and the liver, the detox systems are really important. So you need your mitochondria to think, to move, to digest, to detoxify. So it affects everything. I would venture to say that, to some degree, the medicine of the future is going to be mitochondrial medicine, because these are the powerhouses of the cell. You need them working well to function.
Dr. LePine graduated from Dartmouth Medical School and is board certified in internal medicine, specializing in integrative functional medicine. Additionally, he has advanced clinical training through the Institute for Functional Medicine and is a certified functional medicine physician. Dr. LePine is also a staff physician at Dr. Mark Hyman's Ultra Wellness Center in Lenox, Massachusetts in the Berkshires. He also has his own clinic, which you can find at drlepine.com. He is a faculty member at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine and the Institute for Metabolic Medicine. In addition, he teaches clinical seminars to physicians on the clinical application of advanced nutritional and biochemical laboratory testing. He's the Senior Medical Advisor for Diagnostic Solutions Laboratory and the Medical Advisor and Chair for the Scientific Advisory Board for Designs for Health. I want to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Todd LePine. And Todd is really a master of many, many different subjects, but today we've chosen to talk about mitochondria. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that and to welcome you to the show, Todd.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to today.
As many of my guests, you and I go way, way back, meeting probably 10 plus years ago at IFM. But I don't actually know your story of how you got into functional medicine. I know you're trained classically as a internal medicine doctor, but I mean, tell us your story of getting into integrative and holistic and functional medicine.
I think you probably know the story, but I'm not sure if your audience knows it. So I started out as a prototypical classic country doctor. If you know the Norman Rockwell painting of the little boy bending over to get a shot in his buttocks, and he's looking at the diploma on the wall, I read an article about the doctor who was in the Rockwell painting. And at the time, I was in my medical training, just finishing my residency at Dartmouth. And he was looking for someone to take over his practice. And I read the article and I said, I know the Stockbridge area is about an hour from where I was brought up. And I said, that'd be a nice place to live and raise a family. And just it's a nice sort of country setting. And I ended up calling him on the phone. At the time, his wife had died and he was away down in Florida taking care of her affairs. And I left a message on the phone and didn't really hear back from him for almost a month. And then he eventually got back to me and we talked on the phone. And I ended up coming down and visiting him and seeing his practice. His practice was like walking through time. It was like a time warp. He had all these old equipment and his medical records were index cards. It was really quite amazing. He was like, just write a little note up for himself. And so I ended up taking over a classic country practice. And I was trained in internal medicine and I was practicing as a town physician for a number of years. And then probably about 2-3 years after I got into practice, I said, you know what? I'm not really helping patients. I'm like beating my head against the wall because a lot of patients, I really couldn't help them get better. I couldn't help them get healthy. I could give them pills and things like that. And I did what I was, taught to do. But I said, I need more tools in my black bag. So I started learning about nutrition. I started learning about lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, supplements, etc. And I evolved because I was frustrated trying to help my patients with, mainstream approaches. I always say, if you go to a regular doctor, what are you going to get? You're either going to get a prescription pad, which is a prescription medication, or you're going to get a scalp. Those are the two tools that modern medicine has to offer. And I would venture to say that, there are times when, medication, strong medication can be very, very helpful for certain conditions and times when surgical interventions are necessary. But those are really more for acute situations as opposed to chronic situations. And when you're a town physician, you're seeing patients who have chronic conditions. And that's really where integrative functional medicine shines, because it looks at all of the inputs into what it is that's causing your patient before you to present with their problem, whether it's fatigue or brain fog or food intolerances or bloating or you name it, and then that's very, very fulfilling because every patient that I see is entirely different. It's not like, oh, you come in and you've got high blood sugar, here's your metformin, you've got high cholesterol, here's your statin medication, see you later, and that's it. So I really like the medicine I do. The patients seek me out. And it's very, very rewarding. So and as you well know yourself, because you've gone through health issues yourself, and in fact, it's really interesting. As time has gone on, a lot of my patients are actually physicians. They're actually physicians themselves are actually frustrated with the disease care system that we have in America. It's very expensive. I would venture to say that, nowadays you probably want to avoid physicians at all costs. I think
unless they're a functional medicine physician.
Unless they're functional medicine, right? Exactly, right. Yeah, and so I see a lot of by word of mouth, I see a lot of physicians who are coming to me because physicians get sick too. We're human beings too, and that's an interesting thing when you start seeing these mainstream. I've seen neurologists, I've seen gastroenterologists, you name it, and they're coming to see me because they're having health issues themselves that the mainstream approach is just not addressing.
And have you had any of these people go back and utilize any of what they've learned with you in their own practices?
Absolutely. I think once a physician themselves have a health issue or one of their family members, it changes the entire way in which you see the world through the lens of the medical world. So absolutely, yeah. I think that it's a transformative experience when you get help by a functional medicine approach. Absolutely.
Right. I mean, you're one of the few that I know that didn't have a personal health issue. I mean, so many of us, well, let me back up and say, I actually didn't know that story about the Norman Rockwell painting and you taking over his practice. So that's super cool. But, what I do know of you is that, in our whole cohort of the original folks back in the day of functional medicine 10, 15 years ago, you were one of the few that didn't have a personal story that brought you into functional medicine. And, it's kind of interesting. And it's great that you just sought out wanting to help people further and recognizing that you didn't have the proper tools to be able to do that. A lot of physicians don't have that recognition. They just go ahead and continue to give the pills and do kind of what we were all taught in medical school. So, and Todd, for everybody, we'll get into how they can get in touch with you at the end, but I have a list of physicians now that I'm retired on my former website that I referred to, and Todd is definitely one of those who has seen many, many different types of complex issues, and I've certainly conferred with you on a personal level at various times in my life as well. So, well, let's jump into mitochondria. It seems like even out in the sort of lay world that mitochondria is really a buzzword these days. It seems like there are lots of supplements popping up. There's lots of conversation. There's lots of testing about your mitochondria and longevity and your biological age versus your actual age. And so let's dive in and maybe just start for those that aren't familiar. What are mitochondria, and frankly, why should we care about them?
This is one of my favorite areas. In fact, my good friend and colleague, David Brady, and I went out on a lecture series about mitochondrial health and what to do from it from a functional standpoint. So when he and I did that series, I really got a deep dive into mitochondria. And I actually was familiar with mitochondria in my medical training. For those who don't know about mitochondria are, I call them the powerhouses of the cell. And I can remember distinctly hearing a lecture by Jeffrey Bland, who's the grandfather of functional medicine. And for those who don't know, mitochondria are these little power plants inside each of your cells. And the thing about mitochondria that's really fascinating is that they are not part of our own body. We actually, when you look at evolutionary biology, I actually had the great privilege of meeting and having lunch with a woman. Most people don't know her. Her name is Lynn Margulis. Mm-hmm. And she was the wife of Carl Sagan. So Carl Sagan's a smart dude, and Lynn Margulis was probably smarter than Carl, but she didn't get the press that Carl did. And anyway, back in the 60s, they were studying DNA and they were studying the nucleus and they're trying to figure out the double helix and all this stuff. And Lynn was a protist biologist, which is studying ancient bacteria. And what she noticed is that mitochondria have their own DNA. And the DNA inside our nucleus, which we all, we'd all check our genetic markers, our 23andMe, that's a double helix DNA. And mitochondria have circular DNA. What she noticed is that bacteria also have circular DNA. And what she came up with, she made a leap of imagination that, well, maybe these little things inside our cells are actually ancient bacteria. And I can remember distinctly listening to a lecture by Jeffrey Bland, a PhD, brilliant guy, grandfather of functional medicine. And I can remember him telling me the story about patients who had taken antibiotics and then had chronic fatigue afterwards. And what he said is that antibiotics are supposed to kill bacteria, but guess what? If ancient bacteria are now our mitochondria, guess what actually can happen when you take excessive amounts of antibiotics? You can destroy your mitochondria. And I don't know if you've seen this clinically, but there's a condition called floxed, where people take floxins, things like ciprofloxacin, et cetera. And in some individuals, these can really act as massive destroyers of your mitochondria. And I've seen some people's lives destroyed by some of these medications. I used to use that when I was in my private practice. I can't even think the last time I've used it, because I think right now, knowing what I know, I would have to have a patient who's going to die before I would use any of those medications because they're that potentially destructive to the body. So our mitochondria are basically these little cells inside our body that convert our food into energy. And it uses your glucose and it converts it into ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. This is the fuel that fuels your body. Now, I always, when I lecture on this topic, I always like to say, what happens when you take cyanide? You die,
yes.
right?
I thought there was something else you were going to say.
Yeah. No. So if you take cyanide, you die very, very quickly within a matter of minutes. And you know why you die? Because it instantly turns off your mitochondria. Your mitochondria, it's like a light switch. Just it turns them right off. So which is to show us how important our mitochondria are. The more metabolically active our tissues are in our bodies, so the muscles are metabolically active, the digestive tract, the liver, the brain, the denser your mitochondria in the tissue is when you need to have the energy to run that process. Like one of the things that has lots of mitochondria, guess what? Your brain. Okay, so anything that's going to affect your mitochondria or support your mitochondria are really important. I just came back from Miami Beach. I was giving a lecture on neurodegenerative disorders and neuroinflammation, and I was highlighting to the audience that our brains comprise 2%, only 2% of our body weight, yet they consume 20% of all of our energy, which is to say that they're very, very highly metabolically active. So it's really important that we have healthy mitochondria so that we can move our bodies, we can think, we can digest, we can do all of these metabolic processes, because that is how we fuel what we do.
And so let's talk about some of those things that can both negatively affect our mitochondria and, how can we support our mitochondria? And, can we get more mitochondria? Can we just improve the health of our mitochondria? Or can we actually create new and more mitochondria?
There's a lot of pharmaceutical medications which can negatively impact mitochondria. These are some of the medications like antiviral HIV drugs, the statin medications, which are very, very commonly prescribed. And I would say that they're overused. They're a little bit like Pez candy. You go to a doctor, your LDL cholesterol is 115. Here's a statin. See you later.
Sorry to interrupt, taking CoQ10 help preserve the mitochondria at all, or not really?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Merck pharmaceutical company actually has a patent. Long ago, they actually took out the patent such that the patent says that when you prescribe a statin medication, you can use CoQ10 simultaneously to protect and preserve your mitochondria. So pretty much any patient who's on a statin medication should be on a CoQ10 supplement. Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And then antibiotics are probably one of the biggest things that can impact a person's mitochondria. And I'll actually talk about how to protect your mitochondria. And I learned this when I was doing my lecture series to doctors on mitochondria. Anytime, this is a good little pearl, a little clinical pearl. Anytime anybody has to take an antibiotic, you want to be taking NAC or N-acetylcysteine. And the reason for that is that it helps to protect your mitochondria while you're on the antibiotic and for a period afterwards, because you will actually start destroying not only the bacteria that you're treating, but also start destroying your mitochondria, and that can lead to oxidative stress. Again, oxidative stress, I tell patients, a lot of people, they don't even know what oxidative stress is. Oxidative stress is the stealing of electrons. So oxygen steals electrons. And we know oxidative stress from a practical standpoint when things get rusty. So when your body has excess amounts of oxidative stress, your body is getting rusty inside. So anything that you can do that protects against these excess amounts of free radicals. Now, you can't avoid free radicals. They're part and parcel to metabolism. I tell my patients that if you have a fireplace and you throw a log into it, and you burn the log, what's going to happen? The log's going to give off some sparks. That's just part of the combustion of the fuel. And our bodies do the same thing. When we consume food, we produce free radicals, and our body has a way of taking care of those. If you have too much oxidative stress, that's when it's a big problem for your mitochondria. And the reason for that is that mitochondria do not have their own antioxidant systems. Using NAC to make glutathione protects your mitochondria. And it's people have probably heard of glutathione, and maybe they've not heard of NAC, but these are very powerful nutraceuticals that you can use yourself to help protect your mitochondria.
Yeah, I mean, I do think with COVID, because there was a lot of talk about using NAC during COVID, that hopefully many listeners have heard about that. And, certainly if they're a follower of mine, I talk about glutathione very regularly as the biggest detoxifier. So just to recap, in terms of, things that can really, really affect your mitochondria, it's going to be these, antibiotics. We can take acetylated glutathione, or you can get IV glutathione, or you can be taking NAC, which is the precursor to glutathione. And then we have things like, cholesterol blocking medications, Lipitor, things like that can also affect. And if you're taking CoQ10, that can help minimize that effect. What about just like processed food? I mean, do you see processed, people eating a SAD diet and this ultra processed food affecting our mitochondria?
Yes. And really what that is this is what I would say is that we tend to live in a society in which we are overnutritioned. We basically are eating too much food, and the food that we're eating is actually not it's, I call it frankenfood. The processed food, which is basically high glycemic, sometimes high fat. And that's like throwing too many logs into your fireplace. And guess what happens? You're going to start throwing sparks off of those into the fireplace. So I would venture to say that, obviously, processed foods are calorically dense, but they're nutritionally deficient. Mm-hmm. So you can be overfed, but malnourished simultaneously. But the sheer number of calories that we consume in today's world is that we're consuming in general way too many calories. That's why, I forget the current incidence of obesity and being overweight in the United States, but it's coming to about 50% of the population.
Oh, I think it's higher than that. I mean, I think it's, I think it's like 75 to 80% of the population. Yeah, and maybe 50% of children. I mean,
and there's many causes to that. And what I would venture to say that we evolved as animals to have what I call feast or famine physiology. So we would go out, we would hunt, and we would gather. And guess what? Sometimes we would go out on a hunt and we wouldn't find anything.
Right.
And we might not have much food or any food for a week or a month. So what would we have to do? We'd have to start, mobilizing our fat stores. I mean, the reason why we have fat, it's like a spare gas tank for your car. It allows you to survive when there's a famine. And we don't tap into that physiology. And one of the things I bring up to many of my patients is the concept of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. That is probably one of the easiest, simple things that people can do so that you get your body into what I call metabolic flexibility. And this is a very important concept. You do not want to be eating 3 meals a day with snacks 24/7, 365. You do not want to be doing that because you are just throwing stuff into the fireplace. You're throwing off sparks, and you are never getting your body into the ketosis state. Ketosis is when your body starts burning your fat and you start making ketone bodies. In fact, that's actually what the word breakfast means: break fast. And one of the simple things to do, and you probably have done this with your patients also, is the time restricted eating, where you're only eating in about 6 to 8 hours in a 24-hour time period. And this really hit home to me on the power of this when I had a patient who he was 350 plus pounds. And I saw him, he lost about 50 pounds, and then he hit a plateau. He was just like, he couldn't lose any more because his body was thinking, oh, there's a famine out there. We're going to hold on to all our calories. And once he started doing the time restricted eating and eating only in a very small window so that his body could go into the fat burning mode, that's when he was starting to able to mobilize his calories and then burn off the calories. So those are things which can be very helpful. And then also when you have periodic fasting, what you also do is you take out the garbage, if you will. And this is what we call mitophagy. And mito meaning mitochondria, phagy meaning to eat. So when we go through periods, I just had a patient yesterday who is about to approach the fasting period, the Ramadan. And for a month, they go through a period where they're not eating during the day. And it's interesting that a lot of religions have fasting as part of their culture, if you will. And when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's a good thing for your body to go through a cleansing process where you're not consuming calories or dramatically decreasing the calories, because that helps your body to clean out the house. And mitophagy takes place in that. So your body gets rid of the leftover debris. And as we get older, our mitochondria start getting, a little slow and a little wrinkled, and our body will start to eat up those damaged mitochondria, which is a good thing for our body to have. We sort of, like you do spring cleaning. That's essentially what your body does when it goes through fasting periods.
When I was a vegetarian, I was eating 3 meals a day and snacks because I was eating a lot of carbs and a lot of processed, like tofurkey and tofu cheese, things like that. And then once I switched over to more of a paleo diet and, what I call the Myers way, I can easily go 18 hours without eating, and I'm focused on high quality proteins and it's really nice because there can be these days where you're doing this intermittent fasting to where like, oh, I woke up on Saturday and I want to make, almond flour pancakes for my daughter and have breakfast. But it's, it's that flexibility, as you talked about, just being able to sort of do the fasting or not do the fasting and not have these swings in blood sugar. I used to literally not be able to leave my house without making sure I had snacks in my bag because I feared that I was going to have a blood sugar crash. And now the other day I worked out fasting and then I had meetings all day till almost 2:00. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't bring anything to eat. I had switched cars. I normally have some beef sticks in the car. And I was like, oh, well, and I managed to go the whole day till.
Yeah. And it's interesting because once you get into that metabolic flexibility, that's exactly what happens. You really don't get hungry per se. In fact, a lot of people, when they get into frank ketosis and they're doing prolonged fasting, their brains work better because you're running the body on ketone bodies. So I always make the analogy that our body is like a hybrid car. You're either running on gas or you're running on electricity. And you don't want to be always running on gas and you don't want to be always running on electricity. You want to sort of flip them back and forth. And that is a sign of really good health. When your body is metabolically flexible, that is, to me, one of the hallmarks of having a healthy body, because you can sort of, quickly switch. Our bodies evolved to do that. We're supposed to have feast or famine physiology. So it's a really important thing. So I think you bring up a really good point.
So you mentioned, sort of in passing, that doing this intermittent fasting is a way to sort of reboot our mitochondria. What are other ways that we can reboot our mitochondria? Is it exercise? Is it certain foods? Is it certain supplements? What are ways to reboot our mitochondria?
High intensity interval training is probably one of the biggest things that helps to get your mitochondria tuned up. And so if you ever played a sport and your coach had you do wind sprints, where you're really going, 100%, you're running as fast as you can or swimming as fast as you can, and you actually get into what's called your anaerobic threshold, where your body actually runs out of oxygen. When you do that for short periods of time, that really tells the body that we have to have very efficient mitochondria. So those high intensity interval training is very, very good for mitochondrial function. And then
may I interrupt real quick?
Yep.
So how often should somebody do that, and for how long should they do that? I mean, what really classifies as HIIT?
Yeah, that's, you bring up a good question. There's some evidence that even if you're just doing it for 30 to 60 seconds at maximum heart rate and your anaerobic threshold, and then you go back to like a baseline, that's sufficient to do that. And I mean, obviously it depends on, are you training to be, an Olympic athlete? There are actually some devices out there where they'll wear a device so that they have less oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of trainers actually will train at high altitude, because when your body has less oxygen, your mitochondria are saying, we've got to be more efficient at extracting energy. So that's a key thing. So
have you seen, where I work out, there's a physical therapist there, and he does a lot of, restricting a muscle through basically putting almost like a tourniquet or blood pressure cuff on.
That sounds like torture, but
I know. Blood flow restriction, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Probably what that is doing is doing the same thing. It's basically causing temporary stress or hypoxia, which is telling the body that you have to increase it. Yeah.
Okay. So HIIT, altitude, possible blood flow restriction. What are other things to increase our mitochondria?
Guess what? The latest thing is, in fact, is a term of biohacking called photobiomodulation, which is basically using light. You probably have seen some of these things where they have these red light devices.
Yes.
Basically, we get red light in the sunshine. So if you expose yourself to the sun, that actually is a biohack for your mitochondria. And the red light therapy has also been shown to be really, really helpful. There are a variety of different companies out there that have these devices. They're sort of for your face. They can actually help with your skin. And what the mitochondria are analogous to chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the little, I call them the little mitochondria of plants. And what happens is chloroplasts, we know that when the sunlight hits them, they get energy. So they convert photons and carbon dioxide into what? Carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are basically water and carbon dioxide. So chloroplasts respond to light. Analogously, mitochondria are evolved to be just like chloroplasts. So they also respond to light therapy and photobiomodulation. In fact, this article is an interesting thing showing how if you use red light therapy to your body on the skin, you can lower your blood sugar. Yeah, significantly, like by about 20, 25%. It's really quite fascinating. And it's also to say that, when I have patients who come into me and they have a low vitamin D level, guess what their doctor does? take vitamin D.
Yeah.
Take vitamin D, right? Not necessarily. Most of the time, when a person has low vitamin D, it's sunshine deficiency.
Right.
We spend our time indoors most of the time clothed when we're supposed to be outdoor, mostly naked, hunting and gathering.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at how we evolved, sunshine is really, really helpful for mitochondria and glucose metabolism and a whole bunch of other things. Now, obviously, you don't want to get too much sun. Everyone's concerned about skin cancer and wrinkles and melanoma and stuff like that. That's true. But, there's an issue with, too little or too much of anything,
right.
wine, water, alcohol, food is not a good thing.
Right.
But red light therapy is a powerful thing, a tool that you can use to support your mitochondria.
And now there's so many tools out there these days with red light therapy, from those pads to facial things to saunas. Are there certain wavelengths that you're aware of that you need for the mitochondria?
Yeah, in this particular article, which the audience can look at later, this was a 670 nanometer red light therapy. And obviously there's a whole spectrum of red light, but in this particular study, it was a 670 nanometer, which had the most powerful effect on lowering blood sugar related to mitochondrial modulation.
Okay, so we have HIIT, we have red light therapy, we have intermittent fasting. Any particular foods, any particular supplements?
Oh, absolutely. The foods are the polyphenols. All right, polyphenols. So polyphenols are these complex chemicals that are found in plants. And I like to make the analogy that plants have these polyphenols in them because if you're a plant and you're outside 24/7 and the sun's beating down on you, guess what? You're going to get sunburn. So these colors that are found in plants are actually the suntan for the plants. These are very, very complex, colorful chemicals. And Deanna Minnick is, Deanna, she's a wonderful a PhD chemist, nutritionist. And she is, she talks about the rainbow diet. And these polyphenols, which are found in a lot of spices, things like cinnamon and anise, olives, chocolate. There's a whole variety of different foods which have these polyphenols. A lot of the berries, things like pomegranate, cherries, strawberries, etc. These are foods that you want to have in your diet because they can actually help with biogenesis of mitochondria and also have protective effects for mitochondria. There's one in particular, you probably have heard of it. They're selling it in a supplement form. This is actually quite fascinating. Urolithin A.
I was literally just going to ask you about it. Yeah.
Right. So this is a thing. And I was a chemistry major, so I love this kind of stuff. So when you consume polyphenols in your diet, I always like to tell patients that not only are you eating your food, but guess who else is eating the food?
Your microbiome.
Gut bacteria.
Yeah. And
if you consume foods like pomegranate and you have the right gut bacteria, you will actually produce a compound called urolithin A, which actually helps with mitochondria and also helps with what's called the mitophagy, where you actually get rid of the less or the less active and the aged mitochondria. So some of these foods are most beneficial when you have a healthy microbiome, which allow them to metabolize these compounds, which help to support just general antioxidant systems in the body and also mitochondrial function.
Any other supplements that you're aware of? I mean, that one has become, I think, a rather popular one for those interested in mitochondria. Any other supplements that you can?
Yeah, rhodiola is another one that is there's a lot of studies out of Russia. Well, it's actually some older Russian literature on rhodiola and mitochondrial function. PQQ is another one. In fact, David Brady and we actually came up with a formulation of a supplement called Mito PQQ, which has rhodiola and PQQ together. And so when we were doing the lecture series, I was delving into literature, and I said, "Hey, David, let's make this supplement. This is a really good thing." And I've taken it myself, and it's fantastic.
You
and
guys still have it?
Oh yes, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a great great supplement for supporting mitochondrial function. And interestingly, PQQ actually increases mitochondrial biogenesis, which means that you get more and more concentrations of mitochondria in your body when you take PQQ. And you can find this in foods actually. And guess what the number one food that has the highest content of PQQ is? It's a trivia question.
Pomegranate.
Breast milk.
Oh, yeah, that makes
Human
sense.
breast milk.
Okay.
So that tells you that if human, I would say human breast milk is like rocket fuel, right? It allows a little baby to grow really big. So if Mother Nature puts a lot of PQQ in breast milk, it's got to be pretty important.
So I think people can probably know at some level whether they have good functioning mitochondria or not, based on their current health status. Are they fatigued? Are they, exhausted? Do they have chronic health conditions or not? But is there a test to tell you how your mitochondria are functioning, kind of your state of affairs with mitochondria?
Absolutely. So this is an area that I find really fascinating. So you can look at organic acids. Organic acids are the how should I say this? The exhaust of metabolism. So when you go to get your car inspected, they'll take your car, they'll plug into the exhaust, and they'll see how clean your engine is running to see if it meets the emission standards. Organic acids can be measured in the urine, and these are the exhaust byproducts of metabolism. And when you have abnormalities of these things called organic acids in the body, that can be a sign that a person is having mitochondrial problems. The caveat here is that you can still have mitochondrial problems even if you have normal organic acids. And I learned this through a mitochondrial specialist who I spoke with, because some mitochondrial issues are periodic. In other words, they'll happen and then they'll slow down, and they'll happen and they'll slow down. And the other test besides the organic acids that I do is a particular test called MitoSwap, which is checking for the respiratory chain complexes function. And this is a wonderful, wonderful new tool that I've been using. And it's equivalent pretty much to a muscle biopsy. So if you want to check for an inherited mitochondrial problem, you'll do a muscle biopsy. This is about 90 to 95% accurate as a muscle biopsy. And I'll never forget a particular case that I had where I had a patient who was having unexplained fatigue symptoms. And guess what? He had diabetes. Guess what drug he was on? Metformin. Now, you're younger than I am. I'm a little bit older than you are, Amy. But you look better than I do. And the metformin, when I can remember when it was first coming out, they were saying, you got to be really careful with this drug because you can get lactic acidosis. And lactic acidosis is when you get this buildup of lactic acid, which is one of the organic acids that can happen when mitochondria are not functioning properly. We probably experience that if you ever get a muscle cramp because you run out of oxygen, your body starts to make lactic acid. Well, it turns out that metformin actually can poison your respiratory chain complex 1. And there are actually 4 of these respiratory chain complexes. So when I saw this patient and he was having unexplained fatigue symptoms, I did mitochondrial testing on him. His respiratory chain complex 1 was almost 0. It was like his doctor was giving him medication for his high blood sugar and his diabetes, but at the same time, his doctor was poisoning him.
Well, very interesting, because I know some people are using metformin sort of as an anti-aging medication.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And that's actually at very low doses. That's probably I think 25 or 50. I think the average dose is about 500.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's a very small amount of that they're using it. And that's that's probably working as I call it a hormetic effect, which is a low dose subtoxic kind of effect. So the testing for mitochondria is primarily right now the organic acids, and then looking at the respiratory chain complexes. So
the mito swab that you said is like a muscle biopsy, but I'm assuming since the name is mito swab that you're swabbing something and you're not.
Yeah, you're swabbing the mouth actually.
Okay.
You're swabbing the cells in the mouth. And the one thing about the particular test is it's a live test. So you basically you want a fresh test because the mitochondria need to be alive when you're testing them. You want to check the function of it. So it's one of those, there's certain tests that you got to do, and you have to do it in the proper sequence, and you can't let it sit around for a week before you get tested. That's one of those tests that you really want a fresh specimen.
I, of course, know the organic acids is something that you typically need to get from a functional medicine physician. Is that the same thing for the mito swab as well?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we have testing. We have things that can poison your mitochondria, ways that we can reboot our mitochondria. Are there any environmental factors as well that can affect your mitochondria?
So when you eat food, and I use Michael Pollan's mantra, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. An omnivore diet. I'm not a proponent of a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, but we want to have a lot of healthy plants. And when we eat plants, the kind of plants that we want to have are organic plants as much as possible. And there's a wonderful slide that I have showing the effects of atrazine. Now, most people probably have never heard of atrazine. It's an herbicide, and an herbicide means that it's there to kill the weeds. And remember what I told you, that our mitochondria are analogous or homologous to the chloroplast. So atrazine is sprayed on corn, okay? And if you have atrazine at low levels, it's almost called subtoxic background, it actually poisons your mitochondria because it's acting on what's called a thialkaloid system in the body, and can actually lead to obesity and diabetes. So avoiding or actually eating organic food is probably one of the best things that you can do, and also avoiding any kind of foods that are contained with atrazine. Atrazine also has been banned in Europe, but guess what? We still have it in America. Isn't that, it's sort of sad and pathetic. In fact, atrazine also is an endocrine disrupting molecule. And there's some great work by a biologist, Tyrone Hayes. I don't know if you ever heard of him at all. So if you Google Tyrone Hayes and you look up atrazine, he has shown that not only does the atrazine poison our mitochondria, but it also is an endocrine disrupting. And if you put some atrazine into the solution for growing frogs, you can turn a male frog into a female frog with the use of atrazine.
Yes, I've seen those studies. And what about stress in our mitochondria?
Stress meaning like psychological stress?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, we talked about stress and as a beneficial way in something such as HIIT or restriction, calorie restriction, and oxygen restriction. That can be a good stressor that help reboot our mitochondria. But what about long-term chronic stress? I just finished building a house that was extremely stressful, had a lot of problems with it. Just settled a lawsuit. So that kind of stress, I don't really call that psychological. I mean, stress at your office, stress, interpersonal relationships,
You bring up an interesting point. I would venture to say that stress it pretty much can affect everything in the body. I've not actually seen any literature on the effects of chronic stress in mitochondria, but I would venture to say that there probably has got to be an indirect component to that. One of the biggest things that happens when people are under stress is they're pumping out a lot of cortisol. They're not sleeping as well. They're oftentimes reaching for food or alcohol to treat the stress. So I would venture to say that indirectly,
more
it's
of a
probably
secondary,
mitochondria. Secondary, yeah, absolutely. I mean, stress affects everything, and it's just it's not a good thing. And I always tell patients that what, there's good stress, there's bad stress. There's stress that we create ourselves, and then there's stress that's out of our control. and knowing how to sort of manage the stress. I call it riding the wave, because, if you had no stress in life, life would be boring. I mean, come on, you got to have a little bit of stress and some good stress. I mean, I'm a golfer, and when I have the stress of, trying to hit a 4-foot downhill putt with a little curl to it, I love that stress. That's what I want. I want that stress. I want to be on the line, because that's like about being alive. So there's healthy stress, and you bring up a really good point, because almost every patient that I see today, I always ask them, how do you manage stress? What do you do for stress? And it's really, really important that people are aware of their stress and then know how to deal with it. And there's a lot of different things that you can do for stress. My favorite thing is to get out in nature, exercise, play. One of my mottos in life is work hard, play hard. I think it's a really, really good thing to do. And then have hobbies and things like that. Deep breathing exercises, cyclic breathing is better. There's a recent study that I hand out to my patients showing that cyclic breathing, and they call it box breathing, where you're taking in a really deep breath, you're holding it for a period of time, and then you're letting it out. Simultaneously, not just doing that, but focusing on positive emotions. I call them happy thoughts. Okay.
Gratitude.
You're going to think attitude of gratitude. There's a wonderful video, and I share this with my patients all the time. It's by Louis Schwartzberg. He was the producer of Fantastic Fungi. I don't know if people have seen that movie about with Paul Stamets. And if you Google Louis Schwartzberg and gratitude, there's a short video. It's probably about 3 to 5 minutes long. It is absolutely one of the best videos to watch, because it's all about gratitude. And having the emotion of gratitude while you're doing the deep breathing exercises is one of the number one things that will help you deal with stress on a long-term basis. You don't want to be doing it just when you're stressed. You want to be doing it on a regular basis. It's sort of like exercise. You don't want to be, the weekend warrior. Doing something on a consistent basis allows your stress resilience to be better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if someone, doesn't have healthy mitochondria, what potentially can be happening to them? I mean, we've talked about chronic fatigue, but do you see this as being, I interviewed Terry Walls. Clearly, the thought is that can lead to autoimmunity and various other health issues, MS. What have you seen in your practice as, do you see poor mitochondria as a root cause for many of these chronic illnesses that you're seeing?
Absolutely. And when you start testing for it, you're going to find it. So basically any tissue that requires energy, the only cell in your body that doesn't have mitochondria are your red blood cells. The only cell. Every cell has mitochondria. And interestingly, red blood cells actually have mitochondria, but they get pushed out as they develop. So there's a reason for that. But every cell in your body has mitochondria, and the more metabolically active they are, the muscles and the brain, the kidneys and the liver and the detox systems are really important. So you need your mitochondria to think, to move, to digest, to detoxify. So it affects everything. So I would venture to say that, to some degree, the medicine of the future is going to be mitochondrial medicine, because these are the powerhouses of the cell. You need them working well to function. And I didn't even get into this, there are a lot of mitochondrial diseases. So people can have inherited mitochondrial diseases. This is usually picked up really early on in infancy, because they may have, various conditions where, they may be
poor muscle tone, failure to thrive,
seizures. There's a whole variety of different things that can go on. And as much as we know about the mitochondria, we're still actually learning a lot more about mitochondria. In fact, there's actually some, I remember reading it about if a woman, now this is also another thing, Lynn Margulis, who discovered mitochondria, we inherit 99.9999% of our mitochondria from mama. All right, this is our mitochondrial mama gene. And if you have good mitochondria, thank your mom. You get your energy from your mom. And this is an important thing because when you look at the genetic lineage, one of the other things that you see oftentimes is certain conditions that are associated with mitochondria, like migraines. When people have migraines, that's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes related to mitochondria energy function. Remember, I told you the brain is full of energy. And if you don't have good working mitochondria in your brain, you're going to have issues with thinking and all the other things that the brain does.
Well, what I like to do before we part ways is to ask, what are 3 ways you recommend that our listeners can take back their health?
You're bringing up a really good point. What I would say, the thing to do is expand your social network. When you look at some of the things that are associated with healthy longevity, is expanding your social network so that you are having lots of friends and family around you is really, really important. In fact, there's a TED Talk that talks about all the different things that are associated with healthy aging. And you can look at smoking, exercise, diet, organic, this, that, and the other thing. The biggest thing that's associated with healthy aging is your social network. And these are your friends and your families, the people that you'll call when you're having problems. Someone that you can talk to over a cup of coffee or dinner or lunch. And that's really, really important to expand your social network. And also, as you get older, guess what happens to your social network?
It shrinks.
It shrinks. And I can remember distinctly, my father had a very good friend of his. He was a golfing friend, and he lived to the age of 96. He went through 3 wives. He outlived 3 wives. And he was a guy that I really learned a lot from because he was always making friends. He was always a very outgoing, friendly kind of guy. He had people that he hung out with in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So he was always surrounded by a lot of people and had a great social network. Your social network teaches you. Your social network corrects you when you're going offline. They support you. They give you a lot of oxytocin. I mean, it's really, really a key thing to do. The other thing is managing stress. And as I mentioned before, you want to have some stress in your life. You want to have some good stress in your life. That's a good thing. You don't want too much stress, and you don't want to create too much stress. I call it's like juggling balls. If you can juggle 3 balls, that's great. And then you add a 4th ball, then a 5th ball, then a 6th ball. All of a sudden you got 9 balls in the air, and then they're all crashing down on you. So sometimes we create our own stress. I would say managing stress, managing sleep is another thing, because sleep is really, really important. And some of the latest stuff, I spoke to about this in my talk down in Miami, is that when we sleep, our body is actually removing metabolic waste through the system of the lymphatics in the brain called the lymphatics. And if you're not getting good, deep, restorative sleep, if you're up till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, you're watching, TV, or you're on, your iPad or your phone, and you're getting the blue light through your eyes, and you're just not, getting good sleep when you should be, that is a big destroyer of your body. It's a huge, huge thing. We all know about diet. We know the importance of diet. Eating, as I mentioned, Michael Pollan's mantra, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, be omnivorous, eating clean as best as you can. Those are all simple things that you can do. And then the other thing is really important, move your bloody ass, right? Get off the chair, get out there, go sweat, go for a hike, go for a bike, go for a swim, get out there and really, get your mitochondria revved up. Those are all the things that are really simple things to do. And then also, as I mentioned before, the light, get outside nature. I think, there's a term now, it's called biophilia, which is that we are not separate from nature. We're part of nature. We need to be in nature. And I know that's one of the reasons why I live where I live, is because I know that I need the trees and the plants and the birds and the bees and the flowers, because that's where I feel at home. You get grounded. Literally, there's a whole term called grounding, where you actually put your feet in the dirt and you actually get the negative ions from the planet. And that helps to charge your batteries.
So I love that all the things that you mentioned are free. They're relatively easy to do. Maybe the managing stress might be a little harder for some other than others, but expanding our social circles. I speak about relieving stress versus managing stress, and then, of course, getting outside in nature. So they're all an exercise. So those are all things that, short of some sort of disability, everybody ought to do. So I appreciate you bringing, something that's free and easily accessible to people to the forefront here. And for those, I know you have your own private practice. If you want to let listeners know how they can find you, whether it's a website, social media.
Oh, sure. Yeah, people can find me drlepine.com. You can just go onto the internet, and that's where I'm found. And I've got a variety of different podcasts and lectures that I've done out there. I'm actually not a lot on social media. I'm outside golfing or hiking or biking or kayaking.
Good for you. Good for you. Yeah.
Right.
So you're in private practice. You also work at Mark Hyman's clinic, and then you have your own practice on the side. So also I have your information on my former website if people want to look there. And I know that you do phone consults for people. So I know that's really helpful because a lot of people have difficulty traveling. So if there's anybody out there, needing just to do a phone consult, you're an awesome resource for that.
Yeah, it's been interesting because, with the whole the COVID epidemic, a lot of medicine went to telemedicine, and it's really, I think it's a game changer for a lot of patients because a lot of patients, they might have not the financial resources to travel. They might not have the physical ability to travel. And, obviously it's limited in terms of what you can do through a phone or teleconsultations, but it really can be a game changer for a lot of people. In fact, I talked about, I had one patient who was a young girl. She was out in California. I saw her during COVID, so I never physically saw her. I only saw her through Zoom when we were doing 100% of teleconsultations. And she ended up having PANS syndrome. You probably have heard of the PANS or PANDAS. And she wasn't getting any help with her local doctors. The mother had her seen 5 neurologists, and they didn't know what was going on. And through some detective work, I was able to figure out what was driving her PANS, and fortunately was able to treat her effectively. And because of that, she was able to go and graduate from high school and go on to college. And I just got a wonderful Christmas card from the mother this past Christmas, just sort of thanking me for what I did. And literally, I did that all through teleconsultations during COVID.
That's amazing. I have goosebumps. So awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your time today. It was great talking with you, and I really appreciate the topic all about mitochondria. It's so important. So thanks for sharing that with our listeners.
All right. Thank you, Amy, for having me. And it's been wonderful talking. It's great to catch up. I can't wait to see you in person so I can give you a big hug.
I want to thank this week's guests for sharing their time and knowledge, and thank you for listening. To read the full show notes for each episode, which include a summary, timestamp, quotes, and any resources mentioned, please visit amymyersmd.com/podcast. Lastly, if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you would leave a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and we'll select a few to read out loud in a future episode. Tune in next week to hear from another inspiring guest as we help you take back your health.